Today we're going to look at naked ladies and why this is useful for painting miniatures.
That the entirety of the cosmos is accessible through each and every individual's mind, connecting to the great mind, the great spirit.
Welcome back to the channel, collectors. So today we'll be using some nude photographs as references for painting female flesh. I find that this is very useful for improving the way you paint female flesh, and I hope that you guys try it too. So why do we need to learn how to paint female flesh? I feel that this creates some degree of diversity on the flesh that you paint onto your miniatures. So say for example you have an army and you paint the males and the females the same way. So what happens is there's no differentiation between the flesh tones on these two miniatures and it looks very generic and uniform. Secondly, when you paint some differentiation, it allows a degree of differentiation so that you can more accurately portray the story, which is what we as painters are trying to do. We are trying to impart on the miniature some personality so that it looks a lot better. So I'm going to talk about some topics of how I approach female flesh and why painting female flesh is a topic on its own. So the first topic that I'm going to talk about is color psychology. In a fantasy setting, females are often associated with the characteristics of being graceful and skillful, while males, on the other hand, are always associated with being very barbaric, very passionate, very manlike. While the colors used while painting can be the same, what happens is that the ratio between each color will be changed so that the flesh is presented in a more differentiated manner while painting female flesh. So to portray a more graceful and more calm skin tone, what I tend to do is I tend to make the skin tone a little bit cooler. This requires some degree of control because you don't want the skin tone looking too dead and looking like a zombie right here. So in this case of the female skin tone, what I tend to do is I tend to bias the base color more towards violet, whereas in males I tend to bias the skin tone more towards red oxide. So this allows me to create a cooler base color for me to work upon so that I can create a cooler skin tone. So the psychology behind this is to create a person with a more calm and graceful personality, and a skin tone associated with a person like this tends to be generally cool, calm, and a little bit lighter, a bit more delicate. As for the highlights, I tend to make the female skin tone a little bit more pale and a little bit more blue. And while I'm painting this miniature, what's happening is that she is in the middle of a dungeon, which is generally quite cool. So generally I'm creating a cooler environment so that it will accurately portray this. So the next topic about painting female skin tones would be the generally accepted aesthetics of the female form. So as we all know, generally in mainstream, what is generally accepted as aesthetically pleasing for a female form would be a lean physique rather than a muscular, overly cut physique. So this is very clearly evident in pictures and mainstream media where you guys can see in pictures, most models tend to be quite toned but not to the point of being muscular. But of course there are individuals who prefer a more muscular and built look, but this is another topic for another day. So in one artist's very humble opinion, I prefer models who look a little bit more delicate, and I will try to portray this effect onto the miniature. So one tip I can provide for this is to make sure that the miniature's muscular structure isn't too well defined rather. So what I like to do is I like to highlight the general shape and form of the miniature first, and then after that go into the highlights. In the highlights is where I start to give definition to the shoulders, to the deltoids, to the biceps and other muscles, instead of using a very dark tone and drawing these shadows in. Doing the latter will make the miniature look a lot more muscular and, in my opinion, just a little bit less aesthetically pleasing. So the next point I'm going to talk about is anatomical understanding. So to understand a little bit about human anatomy, we can look at some nude pictures right here. So for these pictures right here, as you guys can see, what we are looking at the pictures for is to understand where there are high concentration of blood vessels and discoloration of the skin. as we can see. Generally in pale Caucasian flesh, these happen on the elbows, the knees, the sternum, and sometimes below, just around the crotch region. So these areas will need to have an influence of red color. So we can achieve all these redder areas by creating a red color glaze, and to glaze into these areas to create some degree of red influence. However, I would like to add that this red glaze that you are creating needs to be very thin and very subtle in order for this not to look like a rash. While there are areas with more blood vessels, similarly there are also areas with less blood vessels and should be less skin tone looking. So as you guys can see in the pictures again, I would like to add that areas such as the breasts and the buttocks tend to be a lot more pale. So what you can do is you can add a little bit of grey into the skin tones while painting these areas, which will add a lot more color separation onto the entire miniature, hence making the miniature look a lot more interesting. So the last point about the skin tone is to have a bit of a reddish glaze. So what I've created is I've used Joe Saunière skin tone mixed in with a little bit of Chimera red oxide, and I've created this glaze. So this glaze went all over the miniature, and hence you get this effect right here where the entire female miniature looks a lot more alive and it makes the entire blend and colors more unified. So the next part about aesthetic understanding is knowing where the viewer's eyes are drawn onto the picture. So as you guys know, when you're looking at a nude female body figure, the general attention tends to center among the breasts and the thighs and the hips. So these are areas that I like to try to emphasize the smoothness, emphasize on the values to make sure that these areas are particularly outstanding onto the miniature. So I tend to add values on the breasts, on the thighs and on the hips, and this gives the viewer a better understanding of the female form, and it makes the miniature look a lot more aesthetic. So those were some of the points which I pay particular attention to when I'm painting female miniatures. I hope you found this useful and try practicing and applying not everything at once. Maybe try applying one or two things at a go and see how it goes. So if you do, you can always tag us on Facebook and Instagram, and I'll be very happy to give you my comments and views about these miniatures. So I really hope that you found this video useful. If you did, please share it all around social media because it helps me a lot, and I hope you really benefited from this. Alright, you guys know the drill. Like, subscribe and all the other stuff because it really helps us out. And if you can afford it, become a patron today. Patrons get early access to many of my videos, and you guys get to interact with me so that we get to be better miniature painters together. I'd like to thank my patrons for allowing me to do this, and I hope to see you in the next video. See you!